It was a perfect life, or so it seemed. But on May 24, 2019, everything shattered. Jennifer Dulos, a loving mother of 5, vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a terrifying silence. Her children, her family, no one saw her again. This wasn't just any disappearance, it was the start of a chilling investigation that would unearth a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. What would drive someone who once occupied the very center of Jennifer's world to make her vanish? The answer would leave the authorities, and the public, reeling. Jennifer Dulos was born on September 27, 1968, in New York City to Hilliard Farber, a successful banker, and Gloria Ortenberg, a renowned philanthropist. She grew up with her only sibling, her sister Melissa Irene Farber. From a young age, Jennifer's life seemed destined for greatness. She attended Brown University, graduating in 1990, before earning a master's degree in writing from the prestigious Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. But her story wasn't just about academic success and privilege. Jennifer's life was about to take a twisted turn, and it all began with a love that would ultimately betray her. In 2004, Jennifer Dulos, an intelligent, beautiful, and devoted woman, married the man who had swept her off her feet, Fotis Dulos. Their wedding seemed like the perfect beginning to a life full of promise. Together, they would build a family, a future, and a legacy. Over the years, they would raise 5 children, 2 sets of twins, and a daughter, each named after a Greek saint, giving them names like Theodore, Constantine, Petro, Christian, and Cleopatra. The Dulos family became the image of success, a beautiful, tight-knit family that seemed to have it all. The world looked on, admiring their life. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. What started as a fairy tale marriage began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. For Jennifer, the man she once adored, the man who had been her partner in every sense of the word, had transformed into a stranger, one she feared deeply. The very man who had promised to cherish and protect her now seemed capable of something much darker. By 2017, Jennifer had grown terrified of Fotis. This wasn't the man she married. He was no longer the loving, attentive husband who had made her laugh and filled their home with joy. So, what had changed? What had turned this once loving spouse into someone who struck fear into the heart of the woman he had vowed to protect? The truth, as it would come to light, was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Fotis Dulos was born on August 6, 1967, in Turkey. He spent much of his early childhood in Athens, Greece, before moving to the United States in 1986, full of ambition and hope for a future filled with success. It was clear from an early age that Fotis was driven. He wasn't just an average student, he excelled. He enrolled at the prestigious Brown University and graduated in 1989, setting his sights on something more, something greater. His pursuit of success didn't end there. He went on to earn a master's degree in finance from Columbia Business School, a prestigious accomplishment that would later fuel his career. But as Fotis climbed the ladder of success, there were parts of his life that would remain hidden, parts of himself that no one, not even Jennifer, truly knew. It was during these years of self-imposed isolation and ambition that Fotis and Jennifer's paths crossed. Their love story seemed like one of destiny. They were the perfect couple, the beautiful, accomplished woman and the driven, successful man. Together, they built a life, and to the outside world, they were a model family. But as time passed, Jennifer began to notice subtle shifts in Fotis. He became more controlling, more distant, and more volatile. Small cracks began to form in their relationship, and Jennifer's once deep trust in him began to erode. She found herself walking on eggshells, unable to predict what version of Fotis would greet her each day. This growing tension would eventually reach a breaking point. By 2017, Jennifer knew something was terribly wrong. The man she had once loved, her partner, her confidant, the father of her children, was not the same man. His actions grew erratic, his temper unpredictable. The emotional toll of the marriage was unbearable. Jennifer began to fear for her safety, something that was unimaginable at the start of their marriage. And yet, despite all of this, she couldn't let go, not yet. She clung to the hope that their family could be saved, that things might somehow go back to the way they once were. But hope slowly turned to despair, and the nightmare that Jennifer had feared was beginning to take shape. She knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a rough patch in their marriage, this was something much darker. And that fear would ultimately drive her to take actions she never thought she would have to take. As the years went by, Jennifer's fear of Fotis only deepened. She began taking steps to protect herself and her children, but there were whispers, rumors, and questions no one had answers to. What had happened to Fotis Dulos? Who was he now? What did he want from Jennifer? And most chillingly of all, what was he capable of? If you found this story chilling and want to stay updated on this case and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Don't miss out on the latest updates, your support helps us bring these gripping stories to life. The truth about Fotis Dulos would eventually surface, but not in the way anyone could have anticipated. It would be a truth so shocking, so unexpected, that it would send shockwaves through Jennifer's family, the community, and the world. What began as a marriage of love and promise would soon spiral into a case that would forever change their lives, and leave everyone asking, how did it come to this? The investigation that followed Jennifer's disappearance would reveal the unthinkable. But for now, we're left with one burning question: what truly happened to Jennifer Dulos? And who, in the end, was responsible for turning her world into a living nightmare? Fotis Dulos, once the charming, driven man Jennifer had married, had transformed into someone entirely different. As their marriage began to fall apart, he became increasingly distant, living a life that had nothing to do with the woman who had once been his partner in everything. By 2017, Fotis had not only disengaged from their family life but had also started an affair with Michelle Triconis, a colleague from his business ventures. Michelle, a striking woman from Venezuela, became the focus of his attention, and Jennifer's worst fears were realized. The man who had promised to love her had betrayed her in the most personal way possible. The discovery of the affair was just the tip of the iceberg. As Fotis continued his increasingly erratic behavior, Jennifer became deeply concerned about her safety, as well as the safety of their children. Despite maintaining a public facade of a well-to-do, successful family, Jennifer knew that things were far from perfect behind closed doors. She had witnessed a frightening shift in Fotis, a man who had once been affectionate and protective, now turning cold, threatening, and sometimes violent. She began to fear for her life and for her children, knowing that his anger and unpredictability had reached dangerous levels. In the summer of 2017, the situation took a disturbing turn. Jennifer had planned a simple Saturday morning outing for their children, a time to bond and escape the stress of their home life. But Fotis, who had always insisted on maintaining control over the family's schedule, didn't take kindly to Jennifer making decisions on her own. He found out about the planned activities and, enraged by her independence, confronted her with a fury she hadn't seen before. In a chilling moment of raw aggression, Fotis erupted, his temper flaring to a degree that terrified Jennifer. It was more than just an argument, it was a reminder of the man she was now married to, a man she no longer recognized. Jennifer knew she had to take action. With Fotis's temper growing more unpredictable, and his actions more erratic, she filed for emergency custody of their 5 children. She pleaded with the courts, desperately trying to protect them from a man she feared had become capable of anything. But the court, despite her urgent claims and evidence of Fotis's volatile behavior, denied her request. Instead, they ruled for shared custody, a decision that only heightened her sense of fear. How could she protect her children when the very system that was supposed to safeguard them had let her down? But Jennifer wasn't about to give up. She wasn't just fighting for custody, she was fighting for her life. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the day, and her pleas for help grew more urgent. She had documented instances of Fotis's frightening behavior, his bullying, his threats, and his obsessive need to control every aspect of her life. Jennifer even spoke out about a particularly chilling event, one that would haunt her forever. On the night of June 3, 2017, after a long day of caring for their children, Jennifer was preparing to take them to an event she had planned. When Fotis discovered what she had arranged, he flew into a violent rage. The sight of her making plans without his approval seemed to trigger something dark in him. It wasn't just anger, it was a profound sense of entitlement. He had always been the one to make decisions, and the idea that Jennifer could act independently was an affront to his dominance. That night, Jennifer was forced to face the truth she had been desperately avoiding. Fotis wasn't the man she had married. The man she had once trusted was now a stranger, someone capable of cruelty, manipulation, and even violence. His actions were becoming more unpredictable by the day. And while Jennifer fought for control over her life, and the safety of their children, Fotis's behavior was spinning out of control. What was once a marriage built on love and trust had now become a battleground of fear, manipulation, and intimidation. Jennifer knew she couldn't live like this anymore. She had to act quickly, before it was too late. But little did she know, the battle she was fighting would soon take an even more sinister turn. The man she had once loved, the man she had trusted with her heart and the lives of their children, was not just a broken man but a man with dangerous intentions. What had turned Fotis into the man he had become? And what dark secrets was he hiding that Jennifer was yet to uncover? As Jennifer continued to fight for her children, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far more horrifying was on the horizon. The more she delved into Fotis's increasingly troubling actions, the more she realized that there was something deeply sinister at play, something that went beyond a messy divorce, beyond a broken marriage. Jennifer's nightmare was only just beginning. Fotis Dulos, in his desperation to justify his actions, spun a web of increasingly bizarre claims. In his version of events, Jennifer, in the midst of their crumbling marriage, had allegedly bragged about dragging their divorce out for 2 years. According to him, she had even gone so far as to claim she would use the mafia to break his legs with a baseball bat. These outlandish statements were a desperate attempt to paint Jennifer as the villain, but they only served to deepen the sense of unease surrounding his behavior. Fotis also vehemently denied ever threatening to kidnap his own children, yet there were whispers of his growing obsession with controlling every aspect of their lives. To further complicate matters, Fotis admitted to purchasing a gun, but he insisted it was for home protection, a claim that seemed as hollow as his other justifications. But these words would soon ring hollow, as actions would speak louder than any defense he could offer. Everything that had come before, the lies, the threats, the chilling behavior, might have been dismissed as exaggerated claims. But what happened next would shatter any remaining doubt about the darkness lurking beneath Fotis Dulos's charming exterior. On May 24, 2019, Jennifer Dulos was last seen at around 8:05 a.m. The morning had begun as any typical school day, with Jennifer dropping off her 5 children at New Canaan Country School. But that was the last time anyone would see her alive. Within hours, her absence was noticed by concerned friends and family. Jennifer had 2 doctor's appointments that day, one at 11 a.m. and another at 1 p.m. both in New York City, a schedule she would never miss. Jennifer was known for her punctuality and responsibility. Her failure to attend these appointments immediately raised alarm bells. Her friends and family tried to reach her, but there was no response. As the hours passed, the sense of dread grew. Jennifer's car was found abandoned near her home, and it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. She hadn't shown up for either of her appointments, and that was completely out of character. Panic set in, and by mid-afternoon, the police were alerted to her disappearance. What had happened to Jennifer? Where was she, and who was responsible for her sudden vanishing? The police investigation quickly revealed troubling details. Jennifer's phone was found near her home, but there were no signs of a struggle. Surveillance footage from nearby areas would later show Jennifer's car being driven away from her home, but there were no signs of her in the footage. The evidence pointed to the undeniable fact that someone close to her, someone she knew, had to be involved. It didn't take long for suspicion to turn toward her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos. He was the last person seen near the area. And as investigators began to piece together the fragments of Jennifer's life, they uncovered a dark and twisted truth about Fotis's actions in the days leading up to her disappearance. His involvement seemed less like coincidence and more like a calculated plan, one that would lead to a shocking and tragic conclusion. Jennifer's friends and family, still holding on to hope, were forced to confront the unthinkable: Jennifer was gone. As the search continued, the chilling reality began to set in. Jennifer Dulos, the mother of 5, the loving wife, was missing. And the only person who seemed to know more than he was letting on was the one person who should have been doing everything in his power to help find her: Fotis Dulos. The events of that morning set off a chain of shocking, disturbing events that would unravel a carefully concealed web of deceit. By 10:25 a.m., just hours after Jennifer Dulos's disappearance, her neighbor's security cameras captured something chilling: Fotis Dulos's Chevrolet Suburban leaving her home. The police quickly honed in on the vehicle, suspecting that Fotis had been behind the wheel. But what followed next would send a wave of horror through everyone involved in the case. It's believed that, after carefully orchestrating his actions, Fotis Dulos had gone to extreme lengths to cover his tracks. The police soon alleged that he had hidden Jennifer's body, taking it somewhere far from the scene and ensuring that any evidence of what had happened was wiped away. The murder scene had been meticulously cleaned, with any trace of Jennifer's presence erased from the house. Evidence of this cleaning, as well as other crucial clues, were believed to have been disposed of in the back of his car. The horrifying reality of the situation began to take shape. Authorities theorized that Fotis, in a cold, calculated move, had driven away from New Canaan with Jennifer's body hidden in the back of his car. His next move was just as chilling: he abandoned the vehicle 3 miles away from New Canaan, in a secluded area. The sense of control he sought over the entire situation seemed eerily deliberate. But it wasn't just the abandonment of the car that raised suspicions. Later that evening, around 7:30 p.m., Fotis and his girlfriend, Michelle Traconis, were caught on CCTV again, this time in a different neighborhood. The two were seen dumping bags of garbage in multiple trash bins along Alfred Avenue in Hartford. At first glance, it might seem like a routine act, nothing more than a couple of people disposing of trash. But as the footage revealed, this wasn't a normal trip to the garbage bins. In total, they used 30 different trash bins, scattered across various locations, as if trying to make sure nothing could be linked back to them. The way they scattered the evidence seemed almost deliberate, as if they were trying to ensure that whatever they had done would never be found. If you found this story chilling and want to stay updated on this case and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Don't miss out on the latest updates. Your support helps us bring these gripping stories to life. Authorities quickly pieced together the chilling sequence of events. The cleaning, the car, the garbage bags, each detail painted a picture of a man desperately trying to cover his tracks, to erase any trace of the horror he had inflicted. With each passing hour, the evidence against Fotis Dulos mounted. The police were growing more confident in their belief. Fotis wasn't just a man desperate to cover up his wife's disappearance, he was a cold-blooded murderer who had meticulously planned and executed his crime. And then, the story took another twist. It wasn't just Fotis's actions that were under scrutiny anymore. His involvement in the disappearance was now believed to be part of a much darker and more sinister reality. The murder had been methodically planned, and the disposal of Jennifer's body seemed to be part of an effort to prevent any trace of her from ever being discovered. But the police weren't done yet. They had only just begun to uncover the true extent of Fotis's actions, and with each new revelation, the case grew even more harrowing. As the investigation continued to unfold, the shocking evidence began to pile up. The police had a chilling confirmation of their suspicions when Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban was found, abandoned and eerily empty. It wasn't just the vehicle itself that raised more questions, but what was found inside it. In the trunk of the Suburban, a bicycle tire was discovered, an unusual item that, to the trained eyes of investigators, confirmed something even more chilling. Fotis Dulos had likely ridden a bicycle from Wavani Park to Jennifer's home in New Canaan. This was a crucial piece of evidence that tied him to the crime. The timeline began to piece together in a terrifyingly methodical way. The police theorized that Fotis, having planned his horrific actions with disturbing precision, had arrived at Jennifer's home before her that morning. He had likely waited in the shadows, concealed in the garage, waiting for the moment when she would return. When Jennifer pulled into her driveway, unsuspecting, Fotis attacked. What followed next could only be described as a calculated and ruthless sequence of events. After carrying out the brutal assault, Fotis then took extraordinary care to clean the scene, erasing all traces of his crime from the house. But as meticulous as he was in covering up his tracks, Fotis couldn't eliminate every trace of his presence. 2 key pieces of forensic evidence were left behind, damning him beyond doubt. A sample of his DNA was discovered on the door handle of the garage, a silent admission of his presence. Even more damning was a mixture of his blood and Jennifer's found on the kitchen faucet, a sign that something far more violent had taken place, and that Jennifer had fought for her life. It wasn't just the DNA that tied Fotis to the crime scene. The police theorized that, after Jennifer's tragic death, Fotis had carefully placed her body into the back of his Chevrolet Suburban and driven directly to Wavani Park. There, in the quiet of the park, he transferred her body into a Tacoma truck, one that he had presumably arranged in advance to further transport her remains. His actions, though executed with disturbing attention to detail, were still far from flawless. His frantic efforts to cover his tracks would ultimately be his undoing. The further the investigation progressed, the more chilling the details became. Footage from security cameras captured Fotis and Michelle Troconis in the evening of May 24, dumping bags of trash into bins scattered across Hartford. The pair didn't just use 1 or 2 bins, but a staggering 30, each one in a different location. The sheer scale of the effort suggested they were getting rid of something far more significant than mere household refuse. As the police examined the bags, they realized that these were no ordinary trash bags. They were filled with items that could be linked directly to Jennifer's murder, discarded with cold detachment. Each step Fotis took seemed calculated to erase any connection to Jennifer. He had left nothing to chance, yet his actions only served to deepen the suspicion surrounding him. The meticulous cleaning of the crime scene, the sudden and bizarre disposal of garbage, and his erratic movements throughout the day painted a picture of a man whose attempt to cover his tracks was doomed from the start. And then, the police discovered something else that would turn the case in a new direction. On May 24, when Jennifer was last seen alive, she had made a seemingly routine trip to drop her children off at school. But just hours later, she had vanished without a trace. The eerie silence left in her absence only intensified the police's drive to uncover the truth. Jennifer's 2 scheduled doctor's appointments later that day, both in New York City, were marked as no-shows. She had never missed an appointment before. This sudden disappearance was something no one could have prepared for. Jennifer's friends, who had known her as someone reliable and committed to her children and her life, began to panic. By 3 p.m. her friends had contacted the authorities, aware that something was terribly wrong. The authorities responded quickly, but as the search intensified, Jennifer remained nowhere to be found. Her family, her friends, and the authorities could only wonder what had happened in the hours between Jennifer's last appearance in public and the chilling reality that something far worse than anyone had imagined was unfolding. By the time the police had pieced together the full extent of Fotis Dulos's involvement, it was clear that Jennifer was dead, brutally murdered, hidden, and erased from existence by the man she had once loved. The heart-wrenching truth was that Jennifer's children would never see their mother again, and their father would be the one responsible for shattering their world. The authorities, though, were not done yet. Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis were initially released, but the investigation didn't end there. In September of 2019, the authorities arrested them both once again, this time on charges of tampering with evidence and hindering justice. But the stakes were about to get even higher. In October 2019, Fotis appeared in court, a man who, despite all the mounting evidence, still dared to request a dismissal of the charges against him. The judge, in response, ordered that the case be reviewed, weighing both the arguments from the prosecution and the defense. But as the judge deliberated, the wheels of justice began to turn with chilling certainty. During this period, Jennifer's children were caught in the midst of a devastating nightmare. The court granted temporary custody of the children to their maternal grandmother, who would take on the role of their primary caretaker as they navigated their grief and the overwhelming trauma of losing their mother. At the time, the children were aged between 8 and 13, too young to fully grasp the horror unfolding around them. Their lives had been irrevocably changed, their world shattered, and yet they still had to come to terms with the loss of a mother they would never see again. But for Fotis Dulos, the reality of his actions was quickly closing in. In January of 2020, the unthinkable happened. Fotis was arrested and charged with the capital murder of his ex-wife, Jennifer Dulos. This was a moment that many had been waiting for, but the truth was, the arrest itself was just the beginning. As the investigation deepened, it was revealed that Michelle Troconis, his girlfriend and accomplice, was also arrested and charged with conspiring to murder Jennifer. The arrests marked a turning point in the case, but the story was far from over. Michelle, once a key figure in Fotis's defense, suddenly became estranged from him. What had once seemed like a united front began to crack, as Michelle distanced herself from Fotis, possibly realizing the full weight of her involvement in the murder. She became a critical witness to the prosecution, her silence no longer an option. The arrest of both Fotis and Michelle raised even more questions. What had driven Fotis Dulos to commit such a horrific crime? How had he convinced Michelle to become complicit in such a plot? And perhaps most hauntingly, how had he managed to maintain the facade of a loving father while orchestrating the brutal murder of his wife? These were questions that would haunt everyone involved in the investigation, as they began to dig deeper into the twisted psyche of a man who had once seemed so perfect. As the case moved forward, more details began to emerge, details that painted a portrait of a man consumed by anger, jealousy, and obsession. The evidence continued to mount, and the possibility of justice for Jennifer and her children grew stronger. Yet, even as Fotis Dulos sat in jail awaiting trial, many still wondered how far he was willing to go to cover up his tracks and protect his secrets. The tragic, brutal end of Jennifer Dulos's life was only the beginning of a long, painful journey for her children and everyone who had loved her. January 28, 2020, began like any other day for Fotis Dulos, until it became a turning point in the case that had already captured the world's attention. Fotis failed to show up for an emergency hearing, a crucial moment where he would have had to face the weight of the charges against him. The judge, clearly frustrated with his absence, issued an order for his immediate transport to the court. But when the police arrived at Fotis's Farmington home, they discovered something far more sinister than anyone could have anticipated. Inside his car, Fotis was found unconscious, the grim consequences of his actions hanging heavy in the air. The man who had once been a successful businessman, whose life seemed to be full of promise, now lay motionless, a man who could no longer face the reality of his choices. In a desperate attempt to escape the looming consequences of his crime, Fotis Dulos had tried to end his own life. His method was chillingly deliberate. He had connected a vacuum cleaner to the exhaust pipe of his SUV, feeding the deadly carbon monoxide back into the car's interior. It was a silent, self-inflicted attempt at erasure, an attempt to flee responsibility and avoid what he had done to his wife and children. The police, acting swiftly, managed to perform CPR on Fotis, reviving him just enough to restore a faint pulse. They rushed him to Yukon Medical Center, but his condition was dire. His survival would be a long shot, but it wasn't the end for him yet. Due to the severity of his poisoning, Fotis was transferred to Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, where he would undergo hyperbaric oxygen therapy to try and counteract the damage caused by the carbon monoxide. But even in the sterile, cold hospital environment, the repercussions of his actions would not leave him. As Fotis clung to life, the ripple effects of his crime continued to devastate those closest to him. Jennifer's children, who had been living with their maternal grandmother since the tragic events, found themselves thrust into an unimaginable emotional upheaval. The very man who had torn their lives apart, who had brutally taken their mother away from them, was now struggling to stay alive. In a moment that could only be described as surreal, Fotis's children visited him for the first time in the hospital. These were the same children who had been stripped of their mother, who had been thrust into a life they could not fully comprehend. Now, they were faced with the man who had caused it all, his survival now hanging by a thread. The children's visit was more than just an encounter with their father, it was a haunting confrontation with the past, the present, and the shattered remnants of their once perfect family. It's difficult to say what they thought when they saw him lying there, weak and fragile, after the terror he had unleashed on their world. Would they see him as the man who had given them life, or the monster who had torn their family apart? For Fotis Dulos, there would be no easy escape. The legal system would not let him fade into the background, and the memory of Jennifer would never allow him to outrun the consequences. As he lay unconscious, fighting for survival, the people he had hurt the most were left to deal with the wreckage of his life, living with the unspeakable truth of what he had done, and questioning how anyone they had once trusted could change so completely into a person capable of such unthinkable cruelty. As Fotis Dulos lay in the hospital, fighting for his life after his failed suicide attempt, his legal defense was gearing up for an intense battle. During one critical hearing, his attorney, Norm Pattis, made a statement that would send shockwaves through the courtroom. Pattis insisted that Fotis had been framed, a claim that seemed as far-fetched as the bizarre turn of events that had led them here. He argued that whoever had set Fotis up had carefully planted incriminating evidence, bloodied clothes and other damning items, on his front porch. These items, Pattis argued, were meant to be discovered by the police and incriminate his client in the most horrific of ways. Pattis took it a step further, suggesting that Fotis, in his desperation and panic, had simply attempted to dispose of the evidence, unaware of its planted nature. This theory, of course, was directly contradicted by the overwhelming amount of surveillance footage that showed Fotis's suspicious behavior. Yet, Pattis remained adamant, pushing for the idea that Fotis was an innocent man caught in a tangled web of deceit. In a move that seemed to defy logic, Pattis even requested that Fotis's estate be considered the defendant in the case, arguing that his client's actions should be viewed posthumously, though this request was quickly dismissed. The courts, it seemed, were not going to entertain the idea of letting Fotis off the hook. Meanwhile, Fotis's ex-girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, was not exempt from scrutiny. She had been placed under house arrest after being accused of conspiring to murder Jennifer Dulos. Michelle's involvement had been a point of contention throughout the investigation, with many speculating that she had played a central role in the events that led to Jennifer's disappearance. Yet, despite the charges, Michelle's case remained stalled, buried under the weight of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had delayed the judicial process for months. John Sean Hahn, Michelle's lawyer, spoke candidly in an interview, revealing that, due to the pandemic, little to no progress had been made on Michelle's case. Legal proceedings had ground to a halt, leaving the public and the victims' families in limbo. The weight of uncertainty hung heavily on the case, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in its wake. Would Michelle ever face the full extent of justice? Or had the pandemic simply served as another barrier for the truth to remain hidden? While the court stalled, the emotional and psychological toll on Jennifer's children only deepened. Having already suffered the unimaginable loss of their mother, the children were now forced to contend with the horrifying reality of their father's arrest and the ongoing investigation into his role in their mother's murder. The court's decision to place them in their maternal grandmother's care seemed like the only solace, but it didn't bring back the life they once knew, their childhood, fractured beyond repair. As the legal system grappled with the intricacies of the case, Fotis's fate seemed increasingly uncertain. His lawyers' claims of a frame-up, however outlandish they may have seemed, were not enough to convince the public or the authorities. The evidence was overwhelming, and the picture of a calculated, cold-blooded murderer grew clearer by the day. But would justice truly be served, or would Fotis Dulos find a way to evade responsibility for the crime that had rocked an entire community? With the pandemic causing unprecedented delays, the fate of Michelle Troconis, too, remained hanging in the balance. Would she finally face the consequences of her involvement, or would the fog of uncertainty continue to surround her role in one of the most chilling murder cases in recent history? The investigation into Jennifer Dulos's disappearance was far from over, and the answers that remained tantalizingly out of reach only added to the weight of the case. For now, the world could only wait, hoping that justice would eventually prevail, and that the children who had already lost so much would, one day, find the peace they so desperately needed. The investigation into Jennifer Dulos's disappearance had already taken unexpected turns, but the depths the police were willing to go to uncover the truth seemed limitless. Their search became a relentless, sprawling operation that took them across the state of Connecticut, following any lead that might bring them closer to discovering what had happened to the beloved mother and wife. The breakthrough came when the police reviewed the surveillance footage that showed Fotis Dulos, with chilling indifference, disposing of large garbage bags and various trash cans scattered all over the city. The bags had been carefully placed in bins across multiple locations, as though someone was trying to get rid of something, or someone, fast. The sight of Fotis casually discarding bags of evidence sent the authorities into overdrive, and they traced the discarded garbage to the city's waste processing plant. Weeks of tireless searching followed as investigators combed through the massive amounts of trash, hoping to find something that could point them to Jennifer's whereabouts. And after weeks of grueling work, they finally struck gold. Among the heaps of refuse, the police uncovered a wealth of incriminating evidence that would push the investigation closer to the truth. But the search didn't stop there. The search party expanded its scope, following the twisted trail of Fotis's actions across Connecticut. One of the most haunting leads took them to a special fishing pond in Avon, a place the Dulos family had frequented. The serene, peaceful waters of the pond stood in stark contrast to the nightmare unfolding around it. But despite extensive searching around the pond and throughout the area, Jennifer's body was not found. Not one to back down from the impossible, the police pressed on. The next stop in their search took them to a sprawling 3,000-acre property owned by Fotis Dulos' company, for which the police had secured a search warrant. But again, Jennifer was nowhere to be found. It was as though she had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the earth itself. Still, the investigation was far from over. By August 2021, the case had taken yet another dark turn, and the police had their sights set on an unexpected location, a house on Mountain Spring Road in Farmington, Connecticut. This property, though seemingly unrelated at first, was connected to none other than Fotis Dulos. The police had already explored many avenues, but the house had come up as a potential link to older, unresolved leads. Despite the ongoing challenges, investigators believed it was worth the effort. After all, they had already searched far and wide across Connecticut without finding Jennifer, and every lead had to be chased, no matter how remote. At this stage, the police had enlisted the help of a renowned expert in finding unmarked graves, someone with specialized knowledge in locating the places where the dead were often hidden. With the expert's help, they began digging around the Farmington property, hoping to uncover any clue, any sign, that would lead them to Jennifer's final resting place. Yet, despite all their efforts, the search turned up no trace of her body. The haunting question still hung in the air: where was Jennifer Dulos, and what had truly happened to her on that fateful day in May of 2019? The search had become more than just an investigation, it had become an obsessive quest for justice, for truth, and for closure. As the months went by, the public's fascination with the case only grew, with each new development, no matter how small, offering more twists and turns than anyone could have anticipated. But even as the trail grew colder, one thing remained certain: Fotis Dulos was at the center of a mystery so dark, it seemed as if it could never truly be solved. If you found this story chilling and want to stay updated on this case and more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Don't miss out on the latest updates, your support helps us bring these gripping stories to life.